3 Lives 3 Worlds, 10 Miles of Peach Blossoms. By Tangqi Gongzi. Translated by Hamster 428. Note: some portion came from Poppy Toland's work. Chapter 5. I lost my Migu branch. On top of that, the night is dark. I have to thank my lucky star to still be somewhere near Donghai right now. I obviously can't hope to come back to Qingkai before sunrise. Donghai is made up of water on all sides. I'm only a four-legged fox who's used to dry ground. I can't tell the difference at all between these water locations. By the time I come to the surface, I realize I've gone north instead of east. The summer sky is bright with moonlight. I sit dejectedly on a low rock off of the north shore of Donghai. It's not difficult to turn back and start again from Donghai, but I really don't want to face that Yehuajun again. I'll have to stay the night on this north shore and decide what to do tomorrow morning. Days in fragrant April are warm, but it's awfully cold when night comes. My thin outfit causes me to sneeze repeatedly as the dark fog spreads across the ocean. At last I leave the rock and crawl into the woods nearby. These woods aren't as nice as Jian's orchard. The tall branches poke out unevenly. But they layer up and should be okay to block some wind. Although the moon above is bright, I can't see my fingers at all in these woods. I carefully take the silk ribbon off and bring out a night pearl. I shine around and decide on a spot to sleep for the night. The trees are really so thick. I've got a night pearl with me, but I still can't see any better than the ordinary animals. After about 3 meters of unsteady steps, I all of a sudden fall into a cavern. My sight becomes clear. Someone has used magic to recreate a star-filled sky. Below, there's even a flowing stream with a pavilion next to it. The cavern seems somewhat larger than my parents' fox cave. Inside the pavilion are a man and woman making love. The man has his back against me, so I can't see his face. Half of the woman's face is hidden behind the man's shoulder, but I can tell she's fairly pretty. She gets frightened, understandably, upon seeing me fall from above. I quickly put on a friendly smile to calm her. She keeps on staring at me until the man turns around at the odd atmosphere forming. A large pond separates us. With his one glance, I'm made to feel like I'm trapped in a hot film of pork fat during summer. It's both filthy and frightening. A series of old stories deep from the past starts flooding back. His eyes seem like they are sweeping across rivers and mountains before calming down. He finally addresses me, "A Yin." I look down and solemnly say, "Well, aren't you Demon King Li Jing? We've long ended our relations, so from now on please stop calling me A Yin so carelessly like that." He sighs, "A Yin, you've avoided me for 70,000 years. Are you going to continue hiding over there?" His voice is so genuine, like he'd be greatly saddened if he doesn't get to see me. I curiously mull over his words. Our relationship is clearly a torn rag at this stage. How can he so casually say something like that? Furthermore, he has the nerves to say I avoided him? I know age doesn't bode well for one's memory, but as I rack my brain I still can't remember I ever tried to avoid him. We didn't run into each other simply because we weren't fated to. 70,000 years aren't short, but neither are they long. The Eastland has gone through at most 20 times of disaster during this period. One day 70,000 years ago, the late Demon King Jing Shang went hunting. He fell for my 9th senior Lingyu and kidnapped him back to Dasiming Palace to make him consort. Since I was with Lingyu, I was also taken hostage. I became Moyuan's disciple when I was 50,000 years old. Moyuan didn't take in female disciples, so my mother used magic to turn me into a male. I was also given a temporary name, Xian. Everyone back then knew Moyuan's 17th student Xian uses a kitchen fan as a weapon. Xian was also Master Moyuan's favorite student. Naturally, nobody thought he would be a female goddess. Although we were both imprisoned, I wasn't the main target, so they didn't watch me too tightly. Outside of our 3 meals, it didn't matter a whole lot if I went around the palace ground. When I think back, I shouldn't have eaten the braised meat for lunch on my 3rd day at Dasiming Palace. If I hadn't eaten that bowl of meat, we wouldn't go through this scene today. I already had my meal, that braised meat was just an extra snack. After I finished, I wanted to walk around so the food could digest. I ended up stepping 2 steps further than I do normally. Those 2 fated steps brought me to Prince Lijing and changed my entire life. Just like the saying, one anthill can bring down a whole dike, the idea that this bowl of braised pork made my life infinitely more difficult is not as absurd as it sounds. I often looked back and thought about how different things might have been and mourned all that was lost. I could still remember that day perfectly. The sky was bright, and the sun was shining in the distance, and through the barrier of grey-white fog around the purple light palace, it looked like a salted duck yolk suspended in the sky. The palace attendant walking alongside me started telling me about an incredibly rare winter lotus that had just flowered in the palace. Since I was still feeling full, she suggested I stroll over and take a look, and pointed me in the right direction. I ventured along the path, shaking my silk fan. My poor sense of direction meant that I wandered around in circles for a long time without coming across this rare lotus. The palace garden was made up of man-made ponds and rockeries, but its luxuriant trees and flowers sustained various bird life, and I could hear the occasional chirping of a swallow and call of an oriole, which made me stop and listen in enchantment. I was happily absorbed in listening to the sound of birdsong and was shocked when a young man leaped out at me, his gown half open at the front and his hair in disarray. He looked bleary-eyed, as if he had not woken up properly, and he had petals stuck to his shoulders. An almost feminine beauty shone through, despite his disheveled appearance. I gave a vague nod, assuming he must be one of the demon emperor's husbands. He looked at me blankly, not returning the courtesy. With a shake of my fan, I continued on my way. But as I brushed past him, he grabbed my sleeve, an intense look of confusion on his face. "Your gown is a very strange color. Stunning though. Where did you have it made?" I was taken aback and looked at him anxiously, feeling tongue-tied. I was wearing my silvery purple gown, which I had been wearing for days on end now. The young man walked around me in a circle, looking me up and down. "I really have never seen such a color," he said earnestly. "I've been worrying about what to give my father for his birthday. I haven't found anything suitable. But this is most unusual. Be a kind chap and exchange this garment with me for something." As soon as he said this, he grabbed hold of me and whipped the gown off me, his snow-white face flushing red and his face turning sheepish. I may have had a male body, but I was still an innocent little immortal girl at heart, and I had to put up a fight, even though I knew it was unlikely to do any good. We were both standing by the lotus pond, and a gentle breeze blew over carrying the beautiful lotus scent. Our struggle did not involve magic, just pure, bare-fisted, shirtless rough and tumble. I turned my head in the middle of this scramble and somehow managed to topple us both into the pond. Members of the demon clan are known for their sharp ears, and the splash brought a number of people rushing over to see what had happened. Being caught like this would have been very embarrassing for him, so he gestured for me to stay there and keep quiet. I nodded and squatted back to back with him at the bottom of the pond. We waited anxiously like that until the sky went dark, when we assumed it was safe to get out unseen, and we climbed back up shivering onto the bank. All that time crouching down there together, we had managed to make amends, exchange names, and even start referring to each other as brother. This beautiful youngster was indeed connected to the homosexual demon emperor, not his husband, however, but his second son. This was Li Jing. I remember being very surprised to learn that the homosexual demon emperor had a son. Following this incident, Li Jing regularly invited me to drink tea with him, watch cockfights, and share wine. However, having just heard that Ling Yu was going to be forced to marry Qing Kang on the 3rd of lunar February, I was in no mood for such jollities. Ling Yu had decided he would sooner die than let this marriage happen, and he had already tried to kill himself by bashing his head against a pillar and was now on a hunger strike. I was the only one who could help him, but I was not in any way strong enough to rescue Ling Yu and get us both out of the Purple Light Palace. I had faith that Mo Yuan would come to our rescue, and was keeping my spirits up. I had been counting on Qing Kang's devotion to Ling Yu to keep my fellow apprentice safe and well cared for. I had not been expecting Ling Yu to get himself worked up into such a state. I spent my days and nights in constant worry. Li Jing began to lose patience with me. One day he had a tantrum, smashing his wine cup down on the floor. "But that's so easily resolved," he said when I explained. "Why would you spend your days with that morbid look on your face, worrying when you could have just asked me for help? You clearly don't think much of our friendship, or take me as a proper brother. I promise that I will help you to sneak Ling Yu out of the palace before the 2nd day of lunar February. Write down anything you have to say, and I will deliver it to him this evening and give him a little peace of mind. I heard he threw himself into the lake yesterday. I had no idea immortals these days were feeble enough to drown in lakes. My father is the only one taking his suicide attempts seriously." I was speechless. Because he was Qing Kang's son, I had not wanted to involve him for fear of getting him in trouble. But he was insistent, so I quietly went along with it. I quite clearly owed Li Jing a favor after this, so I joined him in drinking and making merry, which was all I had to offer. The thing that scared me most about drinking was being forced to play sophisticated word games. I was young and had spent too much of my time fooling around. I was always out and about with my gang of silly apprentices, watching cockfights and dog races and swaggering through the streets. Poetry and verse were therefore beyond me, and when playing games that involved a mastery of them, I was always the one who forfeited. For lowbrow drinking games, it was a different story. Whether it was drawing lots, rolling dice, guessing fingers, or number games, I excelled effortlessly. But I wanted to let Li Jing win in order to keep him happy, so I suggested we play these sophisticated word games. Losing them was easy for me, just a matter of talking nonsense and then lowering my head to drink. Trying to lose at the lowbrow games would have been much harder, and the effort involved would have left me scratching my cheeks and pinching my ears. Li Jing was delighted and started to formulate a plan. He decided on the night of the second to help me to steal Ling Yu out of the palace. One night I dreamed that Ling Yu did end up having to marry the demon emperor, making him empress, while I was forced to marry Li Jing's sister, Princess Rouge. Li Jing gently took my arm in the dream and pointed at Ling Yu, saying, "Si Yin, you may greet your empress mother." Ling Yu grabbed my hand and placed it on his stomach, a golden light shining above his head. "In a few months, Empress Mother will have a baby. It will be your little brother, Si Yin. Aren't you pleased?" My face stiffened, and I gave an awkward laugh. "Very pleased," I said. I woke up to find my clothes drenched through with sweat. I was just about to get out of bed for a sip of cold water to calm my nerves when, pulling back the bed curtain, I saw Li Jing standing silently by my bed, dressed in a white robe, watching me through glimmering eyes. I was shocked to see his face. It was around midnight, and although the moon outside the window was not very bright, it provided enough light to illuminate my small room. I lay on the ground, telling myself, "It's not that strange. It's not that strange." Perhaps he had been unable to sleep and had come to see me out of boredom. He crouched down and muttered incoherently to himself for a while before saying, "Si Yin, I have a secret to share with you. Do you want to hear it?" If I did not allow him to unburden himself, I would not be honoring our brotherhood. So I gave an unenthusiastic nod and reluctantly said, "Yes, do. I like you, Si Yin, and I want to sleep with you," he said shyly. I had just climbed up from the floor, but hearing this shocked me so much I fell straight back down. Li Jing had always seemed disapproving of his father's sexual orientation and, as far as I was aware, had always been one for the ladies. The women he kept in his bedchamber were beauties with big breasts, tiny waists, and long legs. I had a boy's body, and although my face was the same as it always had been, my chest was completely flat. He assumed that my hearing his confession was the same as giving my consent, and so he came over and tried to rip off my clothes. I desperately guarded my lapel. "You've agreed, Si Yin. Why are you acting all coy?" he said angrily. I was still too shocked to speak. How could I have agreed? The first time he saw me, he tried to pull my gown off, and less than 10 days later, he was at it again. Deciding enough was enough, I hit him, and he fell over. I was surprised by my own strength. I had hit him on a vulnerable spot at the back of his neck, and as luck would have it, he fainted. He crashed heavily down onto my stomach, and I could smell alcohol wafting off him. I wondered if all this had just been that, a craze born of drunkenness. Thinking it must be cold on the floor, I picked up the quilt and wrapped it loosely around him, rolling him up and pushing him to the end of the bed, before climbing back onto my mattress and drifting off back to sleep. Early the next morning I opened my eyes and saw him pitifully bundled up by the side of my bed. "How did I end up sleeping here?" he asked, frowning and rubbing his neck. My mind raced as I tried to figure out the best way to respond. "You were drunk last night," I began slowly. "You came to my room in the middle of the night, telling me you liked me and that you wanted to sleep with me." He had been scratching his head, and hearing this, he stopped his hand in midair and stiffened while his face turned first green, then white. I can't. He stammered. I can't be homosexual. If I am, how? How can I explain to my sister that you are going to be my wife? You aren't homosexual, I told him, drawing my clothes around me, an action I had not expected to provoke such upset. He pointed a shaky finger at me. Look at you. You're scared that I'll take advantage, aren't you? I was stunned. Well, you did try to rip my clothes off me last night, I told him acerbically. I did not see Li Jing for several days following this. Before he had been badgering me on an almost daily basis, but after that incident, not a glimpse. Although he was brash, Li Jing did bring nice wine, and it was entertaining to watch cockfights and cricket fights. After not seeing him for a couple of days, I started to miss him. During this time Princess Rouge invited me for a wander around the gardens, and mentioned her brother in passing. I learned that Li Jing had been spending his nights cavorting with beauties, having a debauched and merry old time. Princess Rouge was sweet-natured and attentive. Have you and my brother fallen out? She asked with concern. You used to be as thick as thieves. I never saw you two apart. I rubbed the back of my head and thought back over my friendship with Li Jing, realizing that aside from the drunken move he made on me that night, the two of us had always gotten along very well. But it made me think of the saying wives are like hands and feet while brothers are like clothing. While he was cavorting with these hands and feet, I was the unnecessary piece of clothing that could be cast off. Having a beautiful woman in your arms was romantic. Having a friend lurking like a tiger by your bedside and staring at the beautiful woman in your arms was not. Even though I was not a man, and had no interest in his wives, Li Jing was not to know that, and it was natural he would keep me at arm's length. Being a man was not easy, and being a man with many wives even less so. I felt for him. Rouge was looking at me anxiously, waiting for my response. It did not seem a very appropriate explanation to give a girl, and after a few awkward moments, I came up with some random excuse that I reeled off. Soon it would be February. The Purple Light Palace had been decorated for the nuptials, and the food had improved tremendously. Receiving my note had obviously reassured Ling Yu, and he had just about managed to remain calm. However, the plan to get him out of the palace was top secret, and I had not mentioned it in my note. As the wedding drew near, he naturally started to panic. In a single morning he attempted to bite off his tongue, poison himself, and hang himself. I paced back and forth in my room, wondering whether to go and see Li Jing and discuss it with him, see if we could carry out our plan a day earlier. But when I reached Li Jing's bedchamber, 2 palace attendants stopped me and told me that the prince was not in. He had gone out hunting with a couple of his wives apparently. I left a message for when he returned, saying that Si Yin had an interesting new game and could not wait to play it with him. I sat in my room, listlessly cracking sunflower seeds between my teeth. It was not Li Jing who came to my room in the end, but Master Mo Yuan. Mo Yuan had a figure wrapped up in a quilt tucked under his arm, obviously 9th apprentice Ling Yu, who had fortunately not been successful in his suicide attempts. Mo Yuan released Ling Yu and came over to embrace me, wrapping his arms tightly around my waist. We stayed like that for a long time before he eventually released me. You haven't done too badly for yourself, little 17th. Ling Yu has lost a lot of weight, but you actually seem to have put some on. All things considered, it would appear that we haven't suffered too much here. I gave a sheepish grin and held out a handful of sunflower seeds, saying, Master, have some seeds. Our escape that night was anything but smooth. Taking into account the friendship between the gods and the demons, Mo Yuan had hoped not to resort to fighting. His plan had been to creep into the Purple Light Palace and steal Ling Yu and me back out without attracting any attention. This way he would allow the Demon Emperor a chance to maintain some dignity. But the Demon Prince was too foolish to appreciate this, and he moved his soldiers to the front of the palace gate to block our exit. Mo Yuan had no choice but to fight, and the whole thing escalated into a bloodbath. Ling Yu was unconscious the whole time and did not witness the bloodshed. But I saw it all, the blood and the cracked skulls and ripped flesh. It was horrifying. Mo Yuan had never lost a battle in his life, and this was no exception. He leaped over the palace gate with Ling Yu and me in his arms. I turned around, and all I could see was Qing King with his 8-pronged halberd, standing in the dark red sea of blood, his eyes so full of fury they looked as if they might explode from their sockets. I did not see Li Jing this whole time. Mo Yuan carried Ling Yu and me away from the Purple Light Palace. We fled through the night, finally arriving back at Mount Kunlun. Ling Yu was still unconscious, and Mo Yuan and I said nothing to each other the whole way. I will remember that night for all eternity, although I never wish to recall it. After racing us back to Mount Kunlun, Mo Yuan handed Ling Yu over to 4th apprentice and rushed with me to his alchemy room. He knocked me out with an arm and locked me inside his alchemy furnace. I started to come to, wondering if Mo Yuan was punishing me, issuing me with a warning for my failure to look after Ling Yu properly. I wondered if he blamed me for his poor apprentice's emotional trauma and his physical demise. But hearing a loud boom of thunder, I realized that my predestined calamity had arrived. Mo Yuan must have placed me in the furnace so that I could hide and escape it. I had been born an immortal, but rising up through the ranks required hard work and the development of skills. Elevating yourself from a normal immortal to a higher immortal, and then from a higher immortal to a god or goddess took between 70,000 and 140,000 years, and it required you to experience 2 calamities. If you were successful, you would live as long as the sky is wide, but if you were unsuccessful, your life would come to an abrupt end. I had been Mo Yuan's apprentice for 20,000 years at that point and was expecting my predestined calamity to befall me at any time or place and in any shape or form. If I had been practicing magic, passing through these calamities would not have posed a problem. But I always hated the magic of deduction and found the scriptures deadly boring. Each time Mo Yuan taught this class, I would use it as an excuse for a nap. Despite all my years of study, all I had learned to do was to tell a mortal their rough fortune, and even this I would get wrong half the time. I knew for certain that I had not cultivated enough spiritual energy. Facing a sky calamity without these things was like trying to cut a duck's egg from a chicken's stomach. Absolutely impossible. Fortunately, I had spent the last 70,000 years feeling free and unfettered, and if my soul were to fly and my spirit to flutter, I would feel no great regrets. I had expected my sky calamity to take place at some point in the next year, but I had not taken the reality of it very seriously. I spent some time locked inside the alchemy furnace before it suddenly dawned on me, if I were hiding in here, who would my calamity find to replace me? Sky calamities were completely different from mortal calamities in that once they descended, someone had to undertake them, even if it was not the person for whom it had been intended. The booming sound of the thunder helped to clear my head, and I tried every way I could to get out of the furnace, all to no avail. For the first time in my life, I was forced to acknowledge that these last 20,000 years of study had been a complete waste of time. The next day Master came and opened the lid to the furnace. Little 17th, I stood by the furnace last night and was struck by your 3 bolts of sky thunder. You must study better from now on and work on your skills. If you wish to become a god, you can't expect Master to keep experiencing your calamities for you. That's not how it works. Moyuan had suffered my sky calamity for me, and before I climbed out of the furnace, he had gone into confined recuperation. I knelt down in front of his cave for 3 days, sniveling and weeping, full of sadness and regret. Master, are you hurt very badly? Are your injuries getting any better? I asked. Your low-life apprentice has worn you out. Don't fall ill, please. If you do, I'll stew my body into medicinal soup and feed it to you to nourish you. Never in my life had I cried with such abandon and distress. End of chapter 5.